Welcome back to our series on Quilt As You Go. So I want to talk to you today about the sashing techniques. So there's different designs you can use for sashings, and honestly, the sky's the limit. There's so many different sashings that you can use. So I'm just going to show you two of them. So on my first quilted tiles, I chose to do just a solid fabric sashing because this fabric is so cool. It doesn't need any other additional piecing. This is just, actually, and I got to fess up a little bit. I always tell people, you know, I might use this bigger fabric to help me decide on my colors. I didn't. I chose the colors for this sashing just because they were browns and greens and they were pretty. I mean, for this quilt, because they were browns and greens and pretty. And then I was like, oh, I guess I need to have a sashing. And in my stash was this super cool fabric with these super cool colors and this fabulous paisley design. So sashings can be very simple. I would call this a simple sashing. Now this is a wide sashing. This is almost 4 inches wide. I would never do a 4-inch wide simple sashing unless the fabric was truly fabulous, and this is. So for this quilt, this would be a simple sashings and cornerstones. Okay, so that's the cornerstone there, and I did use a simpler fabric there because I knew that I wanted to do a quilting design that I could really see. All right, so the next one I'm going to show you is what we're going to be working on with the blue and yellow quilt, and that's this one. So this has a simple sashing, but I would call it a stripped sashing. So you can see here, so the blue fabric is a very cool blue fabric, but it really is a little too plain just to be one big wide sashing. Keeping in mind both of these blocks are almost 18 inches, which means I can have a wider sashing. If you're making a 12.5-inch block, that means you're going to go maybe a 2-inch sashing. So this is a little different. So this, I did a strip sashing with the 2 colors and then this Indian print that is very similar to the ones in the block. So those are the 2 sashings that I'm going to show you. Know that there are a zillion more. But when you're doing a Quilt As You Go project in the block by block technique taught by Beth Donaldson, you have to plan what sashings you're putting on where. So I want to show you in Beth's book. So again, this is Beth Donaldson's book, the Block by Block book. And in the back, it has this chart. Now this chart is what tells you where to put what sashings. So for instance, the big blue block that I have made is the first block in the quilt. It is the A1 block. And the A1 block gets sashing and cornerstones around the entire block. The next block right next to it will be sharing the sashing to the right-hand side of the A1 block. So the A2 block only gets 3 sashings and 2 cornerstones. Now for the quilt that we're going to be making with the blue and yellow, we're only going to have 4 blocks. So I'm going to skip down to the B1 block. The B1 block also just has 3 sashings because it will share the sashing with the A1 block. And the B2 block will be our final block in the series, and that block has only 2 sashings. So this is a really wonderful reference in Beth Donaldson's book on how to apply the sashings, or which order you want to apply your sashings. When we come back here, I'm going to show you how to properly cut your sashings. All right, so before you can cut your sashings, you need to square up your blocks. So in the case of this block, these are applique. So I want to square them up. I'm not trimming them with the points like I show you in some other videos. So for this, I'm going to use my really large 20.5 square ruler. These are wonderful. There are other ways you can do it, but boy, if you can get yourself one of these big rulers, it's the easiest way ever. So I'm going to analyze the block. I'm going to center it up, and this particular one I'm going to cut at 17.5 inches so that the block will finish 17 inches. So very carefully cutting along the edges and up here at the top. After I've cut the right and the top, I'm going to spin the block. Now I'm going to tuck it right into 17.5 inches. So I'm 17.5 here and here, so I can square up the right hand side and the top. There. So I know I have a 17-inch finished block, so 17.5 inches. That means my sashings need to be cut 17.5 inches. This is when I want to teach you how to properly cut sashings. So let's say that you have to make 17.5 inches. I'm going to do it how I first think it should be wrong, and then I'll explain. So I've already squared this up. I'm going to say that I'm going to do a 2-inch sashing, and I'm going to cut a 2-inch strip. From that 2-inch strip, I need to cut a 17.5 inch strip. So I'm just going to keep it folded so I've got 2 layers together. Going to line it up here on the end, cut off my selvage, flip it over, and now measure 17.5 inches. So line there. All right. I now have 2 strips that are 17.5 inches wide. Here's the problem. First of all, these are cut the width of the fabric. If you go back to my very first video on Point-TV, I talk about the anatomy of fabric and how the width of fabric has stretch to it. I can stretch this. The length of fabric, so if you're going along the selvage edge, has little to no stretch. So that is the first reason why when I am doing sashings, straight sashings like this, I want my fabric to be the length of fabric, not the width of fabric. So that's the first reason. The second reason is all about money. When I have this 2-inch strip and I've cut those 2 17-inch pieces, look at how much I have left over. That is I don't know, maybe even a 7-inch strip of fabric. Yeah, I could piece it together and then I'd have piecings in my sashings. I know you could do that, but why do that would be the better question. It's wasteful and it just takes more time. So instead, the better option is to cut the length of grain. Now watch how cool this is. So I'm going to first square up my ends, take it over here, line up on a horizontal line of my ruler, and cut off square. Now flip this fabric over, and I am going to cut a wide 17.5 inch strip. More like a big old panel is what it is, more than a strip. For the quilt that I'm working on, I need 2.5 inch strips. So now when I open this up, again, I'm able to use my big square. You could fold this in half if you wanted to, if you didn't have the big square to cut it with. I'm going to cut off my sashing. Now I'm going to turn this, and I am going to power cut 2.5 inch strips. So 2.5, 5, 7.5, 10, 12.5, 15, 17.5, 20. There we go. I'm going to go all the way to here. Lining up horizontally and vertically. It's 2 pieces. 17.5 now to 15. And remember, I could have put my OmniGrid glow tapes on here if I didn't want to have to think math in my head. 2.5 inches I can do in my head. 10. I think you get the idea, right? So I'm going to stop there at 7.5. Here's all my strips. Cut length of grains so they are not stretchy. And this is what I'm left with. One piece, guess what? It's 2.5 inches. So I could bring it in here, cut one more 2.5-inch strip. And this is what I've wasted. So not only do I have the advantage of having my sashings cut length of grain so they do not stretch and they will fit perfectly onto my blocks, but I have literally wasted a 1/2-inch strip of fabric. You can't get any better than that. When we come back next time, I'm going to talk to you about basting the blocks, doing the applique quilting, and starting putting together our Quilt As You Go project.